Welcome everybody to another virtual DMA event. We've been doing several of these so far, and we are very fortunate this morning to have, well, this morning for us, but this afternoon for Stuart, who is coming to us from England. Stuart Craven is our guest speaker today. He's going to be talking about his experience with the DeLorean and the gold-plated DeLoreans. And without further ado, Stuart, I will hand it over to you. Welcome. Thank you for taking the time out on a Sunday to meet with us and to share your experience.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you all for inviting me to tell you a little bit about my life at DeLorean. I came from the aircraft industry and then went to join Chrysler, and it was whilst I was at Chrysler that one of my colleagues popped into my office one day and said, have you heard about this new company in Coventry that's starting up? No. So he said, yeah. He said, it sounds interesting. It said, why don't you pop along and have a word? So I did, and I was quite fascinated. They gave me a photograph of what it was all about. I don't know if anybody can see that, but it was the original sort of photograph of the prototype, which was in America. So they said, well, okay, this is what we're going to do. You're going to work in Coventry, which was fine. The engineering department as such had been outsourced to Lotus. And the factory, when we build it, is going to be in Belfast. So anyway, I joined DeLorean in the June of 1979. I spent 3.5 years there, in fact. When I joined, my check number was 0056. So I was obviously the 56th person to join the company. We each had, there was only 4 of us, 4 senior buyers. So we each had a quarter of the car each. Mine was the front end, and a lot of the other, I had the hydraulics, I had the fuel systems, but basically steering, suspension, and water, radiators, condensers, and that sort of thing. And I had a good team down at Lotus. I got on with them very well indeed. Now, the Lotus is quite some way from Coventry, and it was a 3-hour drive, in fact. Normally in the car industry at that time, you'd get drawings of the components that the designers and the engineers had produced, and they would then come to the buyers, and the buyers would go out with those drawings to get various quotations and to select the suppliers. We didn't have that luxury because we were told very specifically we had 18 months to get this car to job 1. So typically, as I said, it'd been around about 3 to 4 years was the norm in those days. And this is, of course, it's going back 40 odd years. We go down and we talk with the engineers, and we go into the hangar, as it was known, which is what the first slide is about. And it shows you really where we were, that the chassis there was being built up, and the steering gear and everything else was being put onto it. And then notice the car behind, it basically was a glass fiber structure, which very much mirrored what the car was going to be. But we would then look with the engineers at what today's problem was. And they would typically say, okay, well, this is the front suspension. We've got this bit. We've got the links. We need some ball joints. So they give me the descriptions of what they wanted, and I would then go out and find the suppliers that were already in the marketplace who'd already developed these ball joints and whatever, and persuade them to sell them to DeLorean. I have to say, a lot of the stuff that we did pick up was had got Ford markings on it at the time, but that was okay. We'd take those down, see if they fitted, and then we'd change the tooling a little bit or change the specification to make them uniquely DeLorean. The brakes were Ford, and the dampers and all those sort of things they were basically the same as everybody else was using. So this way we could actually keep down the actual time we spent on designing as such, because we were getting the suppliers to design the parts, and then we would take those parts and fit them to the cars. It was whilst that I was down there one day that we noticed, walking around the drawing boards at 6 o'clock, all the designers had gone home. We flicking through the drawings just to see what was on the boards. There's a few bits that we didn't recognise, which was a bit unusual, but it happened more and more. And we reported this back to say that what we believed was in fact that Lotus was using the engineers being paid by DeLorean to not just actually design DeLorean cars, but also something else. And in fact, this is what they were doing. They were developing the Lotus Esprit at the time, and DeLorean was paying for it, or some of it. This was the cooling car. And again, in my area, so what I'd done here is that the engine, as you appreciate, is the PRV engine. So rather than getting a UK supplier to develop a radiator condenser package for an engine which they didn't know, we just turned it around, went straight to PRV, found out who their radiator supplier was, and then went to them. And the supplier was Chausson in France. So Chausson came on board, and we said to them, look, okay, we're going to work with you on this, but we want you to develop the cooling package with us. And we knew that they had got a climatic wind tunnel. So we negotiated with them as part of their package. They would also not only supply the radiator condenser packages, but they would also give us time in the wind tunnel. So I negotiated about, I think it was 3 days that they would give us to prove that their package was okay and was good for the car. So this was our car, but of course, as you can see, it's not stainless steel. It is actually just a GRP. The doors are GRP, but it gave us the shape, and therefore we could use that to make sure that the cooling package was okay. And if you notice at the back of the car, it's got the engine cover on, but it hadn't got the spoiler on. So this was something which, when we were pushing for Lotus to get the cars to France, I'd got a date fixed with Chausson. All of a sudden they said, but yeah, we've had a change of design. We're now going to have a spoiler on top of the engine cover. So they rapidly produced an engine, or a spoiler in wood, and screwed it onto the car, and that was it. And off we went to France. And this is the car as it was, as it emerged out of the transport when we were at the wind tunnel in France. When the transporter turned up, it was this sort of nagging feeling that why was it a transporter, covered transporter, towing a covered trailer? Our vehicle, the DeLorean, was in the front covered vehicle, but I said, well, what's in the back? And they said, oh, it's nothing to do with you. Don't worry about it. So anyway, day one, we started to put the car into the workshops to develop the sensors and such like, to measure all of the water temperatures and everything else around the car. This is the car after it's been instrumentated and put into the climatic wind tunnel. The French were a little bit, you want us to test that? You know, it's a nice shape, but it's a bit funny, you know. It's the doors don't fit. There's no door seals. There's, you know, everything was a little bit, you know, it was a prototype, a real early prototype. But we said, that's no problem. We just got to get this job done. They then said, well, we have a little bit of a problem here, because when we put the car in the wind tunnel, in the climatic wind tunnel, it's also a rolling road as well. you'd have robotics inside the car to drive the car, and you haven't got any. In fact, you don't even have an interior. So we said, oh, it's not a problem. Just we'll get a couple of wooden boxes, and which is what we did, and we put those inside the car. And they said, well, there's no robotics. And we said, well, we'll do it. So one of the engineers and myself, we said, right, overalls on and get in the car. Well, the first day that we tested, in fact, was the cold testing. So the car was soaked overnight down to some horribly low temperature when we got there in the morning. So they said, you're going to really go in there, you know? Yeah, okay, no problem. So we put on big teddy bear suits and such like, and in we went, sat in the car on the boxes. They taped the doors up, and the engineer was there to drive the car very specifically according to the instructions being given to us from the control room. And my job was to actually measure and draw out the de-icing pattern on the windscreen. So they came in, first of all, covered the windscreen with water, froze immediately. Okay, now we're going to start the test. The engine was started, the air conditioning or the heating was switched on, and then they gave us a countdown of how many minutes, and at each, I think it was every minute, I would draw a shape of the area of the windscreen that had cleared. And obviously this is a specific requirement to how much after how long that should be cleared. So we went all the way through this, and then that finished the sort of cold testing. So the end of that particular session, it was now, right, we're going to now go to hot testing. So again, they were like, do you really want to sit in the car? We're going to take this up to a very, very high temperature. Well, we said, yeah, it's not a problem. But it was a bit warm, I have to say. Everything was going okay, really. We were following the instructions given by the engineers. We were going along at certain speeds, and then we would decelerate, and then we would accelerate, and then we get faster and slower and fast. And eventually the speed started to creep up. And the speeds now were probably getting up to sort of 100, 150 kilometers an hour or thereabouts. And the car was really sort of shaking on the rolling road. And I just happened to look in the wing mirror, in the interior mirror, and noticed that the spoiler on the back was now getting a little bit of a vibration on it. Interesting. Okay, so the whole car was shaking a little bit at that sort of speed, and the spoiler got worse and worse and worse, and eventually it let go. So the spoiler came off in the middle of the wind tunnel. The first thing that I did was duck, because I expected this spoiler to come whizzing round through the fans again, but it didn't. It hit the roof. It blew out a lot of the heat lamps in the roof. The alarms went off, and then the French engineers started screaming at us, you know, don't brake, whatever you do, don't brake. Just, you know, get run the car down and under the control conditions. But by now, in fact, the alarms were all gone off, and we got the car down, got out, and then the French fire brigade turned up, and the director of the wind tunnel turned up, and he wasn't very happy. So, but we'd done the testing that we needed to do, and that was it. We then found out that the other car, in fact, the Lotus, which they brought along with them, they thought, okay, once we've done the DeLorean, we can shove our car in the back of the wind tunnel and get a free test. But of course, with a wind tunnel that wasn't working, they didn't get their free test. So that was the end, as you might say, of the type of testing work that we were doing. We then sort of moved into the still 1 day a week down at Lotus, bringing back drawings, information for the suppliers. And then we would go to Belfast as the factory was now sort of finished, and they started to build cars over there in the training centre. So we'd be in Belfast for usually 2 or 3 days. And so that sort of set the pattern now. Less time at Lotus, more time in Belfast, and working again to get the car up to production condition. And it was really at that time that we'd heard about this idea that they wanted to gold plate some DeLoreans. So, and we'd heard, yeah, it was going to be about 100, and then everybody said, oh, forget that, it won't happen. But it gradually got to the point where it wasn't going to go away. And then there was some meetings that took place to, well, let's see whether we can do it, whether we can actually gold plate on stainless. So we hooked up with Degussa, which was probably the best company for plating in Europe, let alone, yes, certainly in Europe. So they tested the stainless, and they found, yes, that it could plate. And I was over in Belfast one day, and I was called up on the phone to go to the purchasing director's office. And then I thought, hello, yeah, what have I done now? So up to the purchasing director's office, and he said, well, okay, we're going to go in and into the boardroom. The board is there. They want to talk to you. So we went in, and there was half a dozen of the board directors sat around the table, and Don Lander was the managing director then, and he just said to me, what do you know about plating? So I said, well, I know the principle, I know how it works, and I know, you know, from my aircraft days, in fact, exactly how you plate things, not a great problem. So he said, okay, good. Here's a file. It's totally confidential. Don't open it until you get on the plane. And that was it. So I left the office, and really I thought, well, you know, what is this? So I had a sneak look in actually in the file, and realized that, yeah, I'd just been given the golden chalice, as you might say, to go and make these gold cars. The first thing was to have a meeting with Degussa, which we did on the 1st of August. Degussa at this point had written back to DeLorean and said, you got to be nuts. This will never work. And we'd gone through, in fact, this letter that they previously sent, and said to them, well, look, yeah, okay, we take on board what you're saying about the surface and how it could change things, it could change shading and electricity and voltages. And we said, yeah, we understand all that, but we still want it done. They then sort of said, well, actually, we have plated, as you know, all sorts of different materials and different objects and such like, but we only really go to 0.1 to 0.2 thickness. And we said, well, no, we want 2.5 microns thick. And they said, no, that's that's an awful lot of gold that you want to put on the car. And we said, no, that's it. The agreement that had been reached was a minimum of 2.5 microns. They decided that, in fact, they couldn't do it, but that they would contact their sub-suppliers to see if any one of those was willing to take it on. Well, the first subcontractor that they went to said, no, sorry, go away. The second subcontractor said, okay. So that was it. We came back, and immediately we had a meeting in Dunmurry and said, right, well, okay, a very small number of people. There was involved. There was a guy from inspection, material control. There was the manufacturing people, plant security, and people like that. But a very small number of people. And the instruction was very clear. This is what you will do, and this is when you'll do it by. The idea was, well, okay, what do we need? Well, we need the panels, but we also need to attach the panels and everything else. So I took the spares Catalogue, which is a page of. And then I went meticulously around the car, looking at all of the bits and saying, can I actually see that when the door's open or when the door isn't open? Can you see this? Can you? So I went around the whole car and produced the list of the parts that we would need to plate. All these parts, I sent the list over to Belfast and said, ship them straight to Dunmurry, from Dunmurry, sorry, to Degussa. And Degussa, you're going to have to plate these parts prior to us actually arriving to do the plating of the actual panels. Degussa was still very reluctant. They'd insisted, in fact, that we paid upfront. So we had to pay for the installations, we had to pay for the gold electrolyte, we had to pay also any costs associated with the plating. The day arrived, it was on Tuesday, in fact, the 15th, that I went over to Germany, and with Len Nelson, who was the inspector, and George Frazier, who was in fact material control manager, we arrived at the factory. We set about, when we got in there, to on the Wednesday, on the 16th, say, to start plating. And we walked in and we thought, which is funny, there's very, very strange, very quiet. There was nobody in the plant at all. So we got the plant manager and said, well, what's going on? And he said, well, we're on shutdown. We're all on holiday. That's why you've got the use of the plant. So, but there's only 3 of us. And he said, oh, it's not my problem. So, okay, we've got now 3 days in which to do all this work, and there's only 3 of us. So, overalls on, and we created a work bench out of the cardboard boxes, in fact, that the panels had come over in. And George, the material control guy, and myself, we started to lacquer the back of the panels. Len, the inspector, he looked at them, made sure they were perfect and ready to go into the plating process. We then attached each panel onto the fixtures and dipped them in the tanks. You can see that on the top photo is the gold electrolyte. Doesn't look a lot, but it certainly cost a lot. At the bottom there, you actually see that's a hood going in or coming out of the vat. So here we are with the rear quarters going in or coming out. Can't really tell much on this one, but and below there, this is our workstation where we're on the cardboard boxes and we are slapping on the lacquer on the inside of the panels, and this is in fact a door. So that's how we went. On the first day, we went with the T-panel on the roof, as this being small. It also gave us an idea of how long that we would need to put the parts in the electrolyte for to get the required thickness. When we came to say, okay, who's going to measure these? And they said, well, you are, aren't you? And we, no, not us, you know. So they got a couple of guys in from the local university who were on holiday, and they were there to actually measure the thickness. So we learned a lot as we went along, and we all knew that, in fact, to get to the 2.5 microns in the center of a panel is not going to be that easy. And quite a few of the panels had to go back in again to be replated when we didn't actually reach the thickness that was required. When we come to do the doors, or come to lacquer the doors, we noticed, in fact, that one of the doors had shifted in the air freight package and was damaged on the corner. So there was nothing that we could do with it. We tried repairing it locally with a guy from the local garage, came around, panel bait it flat, but it was horrible. It was no good. So on the phone to Dunmurry and say, look, you've got to send us another door. So they very quickly got another door, but it wasn't a case of just saying, well, okay, here's the door. The door had to have holes drilled in it to allow the electrolyte to drain out. And also there was other inserts in the door that had to be removed. So it took a day. So it was on the Friday, in fact, that that Dunmurry had got the door, and they put it on a private light aircraft and was sent over to Germany. And it actually arrived in Stuttgart at 8 o'clock at night. So we were still now on the Friday doing the hoods and the doors, and we did some replating. And Saturday morning, and we started on the doors as well. And then Saturday morning, I said, right, okay, I'll take a driver and we'll go out to Stuttgart Airport. We got to Stuttgart Airport, went in and went round to the freight area and looked around, and there was nobody there. It was sort of typical weekend, nobody was working. So went into the office and found somebody and explained what I was looking for. And he said, well, no, there's nothing here. And there's no customs anyway. So the goods can't be cleared. You know, you'll have to come back Monday morning. No, sorry, you know, Monday morning is not an option. But that was it. He said, sorry, you know. So we were walking out of the freight hangar, and as I went down the hangar, I noticed at the very bottom of the hangar was our door. So I sort of walked up to it and had a look at it. Yeah, it was definitely our door. So quick look around the hangar, nobody around, picked the door up and walked out. So straight back to the factory, and we had literally got a couple of hours left, if it was that. So there was no time to take the door and apply the lacquer on it. So it went in and got plated both sides. Here we are, finishing off, just packing and inspecting the last door, and everybody's saying, okay, let's have a drink and finish. We said, well, yeah, but that's not really the end of it, because, okay, we've now got the parts all plated and we've got them all packed. We now have to get them to Dunmurry. And they said, well, yeah, but you can't, because in Germany at that time, you were not allowed to drive trucks on the road at weekends. So you can't go. And we said, well, yeah, we understand that, but you are actually allowed to drive trucks on the road if they're carrying fresh fruit or meat and veg and such like. And our truck's outside, and it was a refrigerated fruit and veg truck. So we piled all of our parts into the truck. We had two drivers, and we said, okay, guys, well, you're ready to go then? And yeah, unfortunately, we can't, because we don't have the paperwork now from Holden's to get us through the customs checks at the borders, bearing in mind we weren't in the EU then. So they were stuck until the Monday morning. But we promised we'd have these panels into Dunmurry that week. They had to be built into the cars, finish the cars by that afternoon, by the Friday afternoon. So anyway, the driver said, no problem. They left first thing Monday morning, and they drove non-stop, literally, through Germany, through France, across the ferry, through England, onto the ferry again, into Ireland, and they arrived in the factory on the Tuesday morning without having stopped at all, apart from being on the ferry. So we were there, all the parts. The cars previously had been built on the main production line. They'd been tested, then taken into the secure area where they were then stripped, and we then applied the gold panels in their place. When I was looking at this a couple of weeks ago, I thought, I've got all the test reports, I've got everything. So I thought it's interesting when you look at the test results on each of the panels, that I tabulated them out. And what I was particularly interested in was that I knew that some of the panels were a little bit thick on gold, but how much? I don't really know. So I sat down and tabulated all that out. And you can see on there that each of the panels is listed. I know exactly when each panel was plated, the date it was plated, therefore the minimum and the maximum thickness from the records. And also I knew the average number of microns of the plating. So you can see down the far column there that what it's saying is that the minimum we had to have was 2.5 microns. And when you look at some of these down there, you've got 3.9 and 4.5 microns. So that's an awful lot of gold that was on these panels, a lot more than what the customers paid for. And here we go. And this is where the cars now are in the crib, secure crib, where nobody was allowed other than those people directly involved with the process. And that was really only a handful of people. This is the final push, as you might say. The cars are all complete, just being signed off, ready to go, being air freighted out to the States, which they were done. They were done on time and they were shipped out to the States. We had a memo come back from the States saying, fantastic, you know, they'd all arrived on time. They'd all been handed over to their various customers. Few issues with fingerprinting, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. But apart from that, no, everything was absolutely perfect. There was one thing that we had a bit of a problem with, was right in the early days of when everything was shipped over to Degussa for them to plate. One of the things that we obviously sent over was the front badge, the DMC badge on the front. But this badge is actually aluminium. Stamped aluminium, and that gave Degussa problems. They actually struggled. They really did struggle to plate it. So they told us really that they couldn't do it, and it was the only part that we had on the car that was supposed to be gold plated, which couldn't be plated. So we painted the badges, and those are on the car were actually, say, they were painted rather than gold. And it was about a week after we'd finished, and I was in my office, as I say, clearing up the paperwork, when the package arrived. And it was from Degussa, and it said, success at last. And inside the package, in fact, was 4 gold-plated DeLorean badges. So I said to my boss, oh, well, okay, that's okay. We'll send these off to the States. So we did. And they said, well, here's one for you. So I still got it. And here is the gold, right way up, the DMC badge, which I've got. The other thing that we got back from all of the exercise was that when we'd been plating, all the panels were held on, obviously, with bolts. So I brought back all of these bolts. And they've all been through the plating process, 8, 9, 10 times each bolt. So we said, well, okay, we'll give these to the various people around the organization who'd helped us. And there were everybody from the secretaries to the guy that organized the freight, to the travel agent, to people who just don't normally get involved. They just do their job, and they helped us do our job. So that paid them all off, and so that really was the end of the gold cars. A bit of a funny slide, this one, but that is the only, or the very first, right-hand drive. One of the other projects that the company wanted to get going was that they previously. We were driving around in hire cars, and they said, well, this is, expensive. We don't really want to be able to do this for a long time. So we need right-hand drive cars. Lotus weren't involved. That wasn't in their remit to produce right-hand drive cars. So they gave me the task of finding a company in the UK, which I did, that actually their job was to take American cars, left-hand drive cars, and convert them to right-hand drive cars. They also stretched them and do that sort of business as well. this company we went to, and we got the training cars that when everybody joined the company, before they were allowed onto the track, they went through the training center, and in the training center, they built up cars. And then they took them to pieces and they built them up again. So all of these pile of bits in Dunmurry were shipped over to the UK into this factory here. And what we did was made right-hand drive cars. The only issue we had was that, okay, they now right-hand drive. There was a few things we had to change to make them legal for the UK. Mainly to do with the rear lights, that they were not the same as what we were allowed in the UK, and also side marker lights and things like that were different. The rack on the steering wasn't too difficult. I again went to the steering supplier and said, "What have you got?" And we'll make it fit, which we did. And so in the end, we produced quite a few of these right-hand drive cars. The company then said, well, we need these certifying to be okay on the road. So I jumped in one, took it down to the ministry testing station and took them through the process that we went through to produce the right-hand drive, to say it really is a left-hand drive, but now right-hand drive. So that was quite an interesting little project. Again, no engineering involvement at all. It was like down to me to say, well, I think we need to do this, or let's do that. Then the other project that when we finished with this one that they gave me was in fact the turbo cars. So we had an engineering department at that time just starting up. So Mike Loseby was the principal engineer and ex-Aston Martin guy. And he said, yeah, we need to supercharge these cars, turbocharge them. So we got some turbos, and we said, right, okay, we can see how we can get them in. We can get them to fit. We can do this. What we just need to do now is go to Renault and say, we need the engines changing to be suitable for turbocharging. So booked a meeting with Renault over to Paris, and we went into the meeting in Paris, and you could tell as you walked in, the French were not impressed. They were not going to do this. And we said, well, look, this is all we're going to do. And they said, no, you can't do it. You know, it's impossible. You can't do it. Everything you wanted, you couldn't do. So, no, well, okay, but we believe we can. So we were getting nowhere really, and the meetings broke up. And there was one of the guys in the meeting was an engineer from Volvo. And he came up to me and he gave me a bit of paper. And he said, don't tell the French. He said, but those are the part numbers for the camshafts you need. He said, we've done it. And it goes very well. So that was it. We also made 2 supercharged cars. And again, I drove one around for some time, and it was pretty impressive. I left at the end of the company. Didn't do me any disservice, as you might say. I walked into a job at Jaguar and finished my time there some years ago now, taking early retirement, having risen up through Jaguar to being the senior purchasing manager for body and exterior. So it was a good learning experience. The DeLorean behind me on the wall there, that's from my office in Coventry. So as I walked out, that came with me.
Did they market and try to sell these cars before you guys figured out if you could make them or not? Because you showed that you made 2, and I assume they tried to sell more, and 2 was all they could get. So were they already like selling them and saying they can do them and set a price point before you figured out you could?
Absolutely, yes.
That's what I thought.
It was very clear when we went to Degussa, that the very first meeting, we were going with this baggage on our back, which said we've committed. So the officers in the States had made the commitment. They got 2 people who wanted to buy them, and I believe they'd probably taken the money. And that was it. It was just a case of, okay, go and make them.
There were 3 cars, right? So where did the extra panels you guys made, were they made at the same time?
The extra panels, they were shipped to the States as a spare set because one of the things, obviously, which was critical to gold plating was that if you damage a panel, then you have to go through the whole process of replating. You can't locally repair it, as you might say. And when you actually do that, the chances of you getting the orientation of the panel in the electrolyte on the same angle, to getting exactly the same voltage that's going through the part, you're going to get a change of color. It's going to shade. So in fact, what happened is that one of the doors was damaged in Dunmurry. So a door, the spare set of parts went over to the States minus one door. And they actually replated plated one door in the States, and it's a different color. It's a brown rather than a gold. But the receivers, when the company went down, they said, okay, make it into a car. So they did, and they got another door for it.
So which one's the door that has the inside plating? That's not this one, is it?
No, what has been plated on both sides?
Yeah.
Absolutely no idea. One thing that I couldn't control, and I don't know whether anybody else did, to be honest, was to identify which door from the numbers which we gave them, simply number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I don't know which one of those went on which car.
We did find in the file, they had a parts list that included the gold cars and the spare parts, or I should say it included the spare parts. And I've highlighted on this scan here, so I'm trying to grab a book while I'm doing this. In that dealer net column, that's what would have been the dealer cost on those parts. All the part numbers are prefaced with GD, and those were the gold parts. Mm-hmm. So you can see what was the expected price on those front fenders, door hinges. There's another one that I'm not sure if is there, but shows the price of a gold wing door at about, I think it's like $24,000 for the gold plated spare door. If it had turned out, in fact, that one of the owners of one of the cars had actually needed to buy a replacement part.
Hey, Stuart, did you say whose idea it was to do this? You know, was it like who was sitting around and said, we're going to do this and market it and then sell them?
It came from America. It came from John DeLorean, and there is speculation as to actually who gave him the idea. But it was all to do with tying up with American Express. That they were the people that had got a great circulation on their magazine, and I actually do have the original here. It's the copy which was in the file that I wasn't supposed to open until I got on the plane, and this is obviously the catalogue which started it all off.
One last question: the cars sold at, as you know, for $85,000 each. How much did they actually cost, in your estimation? How much of a loss or how much was a profit was there?
Very difficult to work out, but when we did finish the cars, we were told, in fact, that we didn't make a loss. But whether we made a profit or not, I don't know. And the trouble was that a lot of the costs, they were in Deutschmarks. So, you know, you've got a lot of currency fluctuation going on. But and there was I don't think anybody really was in a position to count the beans and make sure that it was correct. You know, I mean, it was just like, we've got to get this done. We were committed. They were legally signed contracts, and it had to be done. Simple as that.
Question I have was, I've heard through the grapevine that these cars were not meant to be driven, that they were really easy to scratch up. Since you were actually there for the plating, was that the case? Were these meant to be show pieces, or was it something you were intended to drive?
No, in fact, they were, as far as we were concerned, they were fully roadworthy cars. I mean, the donor cars were built on the track to exactly the same standards as any other car. All we did was just strip the panels off and then put gold-plated panels on.
But that gold plating, then, it wasn't like if you're driving down the road and you get a little rock kick up or something, it's going to scratch that right off. Or...
It was pretty resilient. The gold was. The issue that I think that the gold plating face is if you actually damage the surface, that you're going to get this shading. It's going to look different. It's not going to be the same, which I think is I think it's probably exactly the same as what you even get with the stainless. That if you do scratch it, it is going to actually come through, because the scratches are not necessarily in the same line as the brush marks, and therefore you're going to get a slightly different color.
Did the gold add much weight to the car?
I don't believe it did. I think it was no. I'm just thinking about somewhere that I have seen some of the data that I've got, which actually tells me the weight of the total weight of the gold, which went onto all of the cars, all of the panels, not specifically down to each one. But that was done in the calculation because Degussa had given us a average consumption, and therefore they charged us, and they told, they expected how many grams per panel, but at the end of the whole thing, that all went out the window. It was a case of whatever was left in the electrolyte, they took it and reprocessed it back to the gold.
Can I ask where the wheels originally played?
They were done by Kent Alloys down in Kent, and they were painted, so they're not actually gold plated.
Thank you.
So the wheels they are painted, and if you want the color, it's the same color that Rover used on the SD1.
Was it disappointment or relief that only 2 cars were sold in the end?
I think at that time we've got a lot more problems than just making 2 cars. So had more sold, okay, perhaps the company would have survived. I don't know.
You mentioned the turbo. Are you referring to the work done by Legend Industries, or was there a separate turbo project being done in Europe?
No, this was in fact done in Coventry. The turbos, if I remember right, were Garrett, and we actually did it in our small engineering area that we had in Coventry. And we had 2 cars, an auto and a manual.
Any idea what happened to those cars?
No idea at all. No idea. I think UK DeLorean owners know the fate of those cars, because they were very much interested in the fact that they were built. So they may know.
Okay, thanks.
Again, Stuart, thank you so much. It's such a fascinating topic, and we're really thankful to have your time to share it with us. And on behalf of all the officers and myself, I'd like to wish everybody a very safe holiday season, very happy holiday season. Like I said, you guys are more than welcome to stay on and chat, or go about the rest of your day and enjoy. So.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, and thank you for allowing me to be part of your club for an hour and a half.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Stuart.